The DOJ is in big trouble. I mean, big trouble. We can talk about what took place in the James Comey criminal case, where Lindsey Halligan, Donald Trump's handpicked top federal prosecutor out of the Eastern District of Virginia with no prior federal prosecutorial experience, may have provided a fake grand jury indictment to the court and claimed it was the operative indictment. You may say, huh? I know we've described it before, but me and Michael Popok are going to break it down in detail that you haven't seen before. Speaking about the DOJ being in big trouble, it should be noted that Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, ratified the conduct of Lindsey Halligan not once but twice, said, I reviewed this grand jury transcript and this is the way I would have handled it. Really? By making it potentially a fraudulent grand jury indictment, the operative indictment? Okay, Pam Bondi. The time for accountability, Pam Bondi may take a different track than Lindsey Halligan, but I think accountability will be coming for Pam Bondi as well for that and other horrific actions. Speaking about, again, the DOJ in big trouble, a theme of this episode, now they're under a legal obligation to release the Epstein Files based on the discharge petition this past week becoming law. We obviously know the DOJ is going to do what it can to try to cover up the release of these Epstein files, whether it's asserting objections in the form of there's an ongoing investigation or national security, or just redact everything, or just, I don't know, maybe put 1,000 documents out one week, then wait another few months, then drop another 1,000 documents, cherry pick ones that may not be relevant to the underlying information that people want. We'll talk about that. And then we should talk about what's going on in terms of these gerrymandering efforts, Trump's effort to rig the midterms, Democrats fighting back, the federal judge in Texas, who was a Trump-appointed judge, part of a 3-judge panel that found the Texas map to be basically a racist map, and they cited a DOJ letter, get the theme of DOJ on this episode, to the governor of Texas saying, we want a racist map, essentially. And the judge is like, you kind of put it in the letter you want a racist map. If you simply said you want it to be a partisan map, then people wouldn't have liked it, but at least it could have potentially passed muster. But it violates the Voting Rights Act because you said it was a racist map and you're racist gerrymandering. Those were the words you used. Well, Justice Alito, right-wing extremist judge in the Supreme Court, blocked the Trump-appointed judge's order blocking the Texas map. So the racist Texas map now remains in effect as of this recording. There will have to be emergency briefing per Justice Alito's schedule there, but we'll break down what the right-wing Supreme Court has planned there. So it was a good thing that California Governor Gavin Newsom asserted his moral and formal authority with Prop 50, and Democrats need to fight back across the country because this right-wing Supreme Court is going to try to do everything to turn America further into the fascist dystopian nightmare that they dream about. Let's bring in Michael Popok.
I think we're done with the show. That is good night, everybody.
Night. That's it. Choppier.
Yeah, we're done. So we got so much to unpack from just Saturday to Saturday that you just outlined there. And, and it just crazy shit, as Kathy Hochul, the soon to be reelected governor of New York, said out loud on MSNBC and MS Now. She said out loud about Elise Stefanik, who's running against her after the Oval Office brofest between Donald Trump, and there it is, and Mamdani, which led to my favorite New York Post headline of all, not that one. They posted another one that said, Trump says he would feel comfortable living in socialist Zoran Mamdani's New York City. After that, and Elise Stefanik said, well, we will have to agree to disagree, and he's still a jihadist, and he's Kathy Hochul's jihadist, the governor of New York she's now running against. And Kathy Hochul just said out loud, yeah, she's full of shit. I mean, literally, this is where we're at now with the administration. But, to watch Donald Trump praise this new mayor, the mayor-elect, and intervene a number of times when Fox and other reporters tried to drag them into an argument. I mean, look, obviously Donald Trump felt that this is the quickest way to embrace affordability was to use Mamdani as a totem pole and cling to him and say, hey, we have a lot in common. We're all about affordability. Look at my affordability buddy over here. You know, he's a very nice person. I wouldn't call him a jihadist and all of that. It was just so transparent for people in MAGA that were like, what the F just happened in the Oval Office? It was obvious that Donald Trump needs a quick fix to his economy crushing everybody. And he went for the white hot superstar that is now Zoran Mamdani and said, you're my buddy too, because he needs, you know, that kind of endorsement, if you will, just like he's trying to get the endorsement of a convicted child sex trafficker in Ghislaine Maxwell. That's how low he has sunk, while he attacks people that just quit the party or quit Congress, like Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, the world is turned upside down because Donald Trump can't figure out why, with his depraved and inhumane policies, why he's down at not only 38% approval rating among all voters, he's down to a 26% approval rating among independents. And the last I looked, the Republican Party can't win the midterms or beyond without independent support, which is completely ran screaming away from Donald Trump. So he looks at these poll numbers and all the things that say he's terrible on the economy. That's what he keeps pushing. He's terrible on immigration. That's what he keeps pushing. He's pushing those buttons and wondering why the American people have completely rejected him. You did a great piece about, it's not just the polling, the official polling. It's not just election night 2 weeks ago. That was a resounding defeat for Donald Trump himself, but it's even like the proxies for his popularity, like people that rush to buy Truth Social stock. Well, it's now crushed. It's now down 70% since its high because people are no longer using that as a proxy because it's no longer cool to be associated with Donald Trump. He is now officially, if he wasn't the night of the election 2 weeks ago, he is the lame duck president that he always feared that he would be. That's why he talks about running for a third term and being on the ballot. And now he sees the American people, MAGA, rejecting him. And the Epstein, we'll talk about the Epstein cover-up of the cover-up and the next step in this performative art piece of the House passing a bill in order to release the files when none of that ever was necessary. The files have always been sitting with the executive branch. They never needed the legislative branch to force them, call on them to do anything. It's always just been a filter in order to avoid providing America with transparency. But now we see through it. And that's what I think the polling and then it just devolves down into the court cases and the lack of credibility and respect of the Department of Justice, which is forced to take crazy positions in court, which are losers. And so that's where you and I cover at the intersection of law and politics.
The lamest of the lame ducks in the history of the United States presidency. I mean, it's almost like seeing a pretender there, this grotesque thing in the Oval Office who wakes up one day and threatens to hang Democratic lawmakers, saying George Washington would want to do it because this group of Democratic senators and Congress members, veterans, special forces people as well, they simply said, you can't follow unlawful orders. That's just a statement of the law.
Right.
Not a controversial statement. It is a restatement of what the law is. You can't follow unlawful orders. And this comes at a time where we've also learned that the main military lawyer from JAG responsible, whose jurisdiction is the determination about the legality of the strikes on those Venezuelan fishing boats and also the strikes in the Pacific as a corollary, put out an opinion stating that these were extrajudicial killings and would be war crimes. But the military lawyer was overruled by, it's the theme of the episode, Pam Bondi in the Department of Justice, who then said these war crimes are actually lawful. It's why Bondi and Hegseth one day for Bondi
will be indicted.
It may not just be the legal license. It may be seeing herself one day on a war crimes tribunal.
Could you imagine, just to show you how things have turned and the ground has shifted under Donald Trump, and as we've been talking about, could you imagine Ro Khanna saying what he just said about warning, advising the Department of Justice and others that if they don't comply with federal law and release the Epstein Files, that they'll be on the receiving end in a future administration of their own criminal prosecution. We heard Elizabeth Warren say the same thing. See, now the Democrats are not only talking about the midterms, they're talking about life after Trump and what it means, and reminding those that are below Donald Trump, who may enjoy some sort of special immunity power, but the rest of them do not. And that they, once the Department of Justice and the House and hopefully the Senate are all in the hands of the Democrats, they're in for a rude awakening with a statute of limitations that's not going to apply to many of these things. And I've got a new catchphrase. I think it should show up on Midas Touch merchandise. I think it's the new watchword for America to Donald Trump. And I think it's quiet, piggy, quiet. And just get a picture of Donald Trump and all his corpulence on a thing with quiet piggy underneath it. Because, in addition to that, he still thinks he's living in the golden era where he gets to abuse women, be misogynistic, be racist, pick on women reporters, and get away with it. But his superpowers are gone. Somebody needs to wake him up. And that's why when you and I get around to talking about the 25th Amendment, I used to think, no, there's no way. But you're starting to see the immolation of the Republican and MAGA party before our very eyes.
And it was summed up this week, I think, in what we saw in the court with not just the misconduct, but I think the criminality with fake grand jury indictments against Trump's political enemies, and Donald Trump calling a female reporter from Bloomberg Piggy and saying, quiet, Piggy. Then when his press secretary propagandist Caroline Leavitt is asked about it, she goes, that's why people voted for him. They want him to do that. And you should all just be thankful that you have access to ask him questions, even if he calls you Piggy. There was another moment also that I covered more than I think anybody else, or perhaps even more than I should have, but I thought it was illustrative, that Caroline Leavitt gave an interview with this Miranda Devine on the New York Post, and she was asked about Donald Trump spraying cologne and perfume on the leader of Syria, who used to be the leader of Al-Qaeda, who just came in the Oval Office. And Caroline says, that's just what he does. He loves spraying his perfume and cologne on all of us. And I'm just thinking to myself, what? You go into the Oval Office and he starts sniffing you and spraying cologne on your body? Regarding your point about doing the quiet piggy shirts, the issue is, and I created a rule back when I started Midas Touch, that I can't have any merch that has Donald Trump's face on it, because there could be no contact with his face, even in a form of a T-shirt and the body of a Midas Mighty.
Have you seen Rosie O'Donnell's version of that, though? With a giant Trump face? You should see on Instagram.
If it still resembles his face, it still meets my criteria for not allowed to be on Midas merch. But California Governor Gavin Newsom has also been putting out a lot of these photos of Trump as a pig, and Newsom has been saying quiet piggy over and over again. One other point, and then we'll get to some legal news, which is just think about it like this. Marjorie Taylor Greene and Liz Cheney both have been pushed out of the Republican Party for the exact opposite reasons. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who said the January 6th insurrection was not an insurrection, and she was basically involved in it, right? She was pushed out by Trump because she called for the release of the Epstein Files and said things are not more affordable. But you had her basically being Trump's ally on January 6th. Not basically, she was Trump's ally. And then Liz Cheney pushed out because she wanted Trump to be held accountable for the insurrection, and that it was indeed an insurrection. So where you're a party and you pushed out the Cheneys and you pushed out the Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Marjorie Taylor Greene said in her resignation statement that she feels like a battered wife to Donald Trump. That was her exact term. And Trump calls her Marjorie Trader Brown right now. What is that? It's a cult. It's not a political party. And then you have people like MAGA Mike Johnson, a literal yes man right out of Central Casting, for that role. And what's MAGA Mike doing right now? Well, MAGA Mike wants to change the rules regarding discharge petitions, because he's now worried that there's going to be a lot of other discharge petitions coming because people were like, hey, this worked. Right. Let's do it. Right. So let's ban stock trading, right? There's an Anna Paulina-led discharge petition on that, which I think that, on lots of issues, she's maybe one of the strangest individuals out there.
Oh, yeah.
That's even really her name. But on this, yeah, I'd like to see banning stock trading, the way it's currently happening on Capitol Hill. But Popok, why don't we do this from an organizational structure of this episode?
Let's put structure on this. I think what we just said right now goes into 25th Amendment. So let me pass it to you. Sure.
And then let's focus the next segment on Lindsey Halligan and what's going on in Eastern District of Virginia. And then we can talk about Epstein, and then we can talk about what's happening with Trump's efforts to rig the midterms. But why don't we finish this segment and put an organization on it? I think this lends itself to the 25th Amendment as a real thing that should be discussed.
Absolutely. And the fact that you and I and our audience has to constantly invoke the 25th Amendment to remove a president who's become incapacitated or has committed crimes or treason or in any other way is infirmed and should not be the leader of the free world with his finger hovering over the nuclear button. We're at that moment again, and it's not just the quiet piggy. It is him feeling that it was completely appropriate for him to call for the assassination of elected officials of the Democratic Party because he disagreed with a video that they made, all veterans, and reminding the military, because you got to talk to the military. One of the ways to get through is through social media and a video to remind them the way that Mark Milley did in the first term and the way that other members of the military did in the first term, that if Trump orders you to do something unconstitutional or illegal, you actually have a duty not to follow that order. And that's a long-standing principles of law, ones that, of course, the Carolyn Levitts of the world want to ignore. They're calling for treason and to ignore Donald Trump. No, she leaves out, she always leaves out the part. And she leaves out the part about what they called for, which is to remind the military that if the order is unconstitutional or illegal, you are, as a sworn officer that is sworn to uphold the Constitution yourself, you have to break the chain of command at that point. And that is legitimate. And what does Donald Trump say? Hang them high. George Washington would have hanged them for treason, retweeting and truthing other people's sentiments like that, which led to a firestorm of support. We are only months out of the Charlie Kirk murder, okay, where Donald Trump went off, got off his rocker and decided to turn the White House into a podcast studio for Charlie Kirk and his widow, and for JD Vance and everybody in the administration. Go out to Arizona. As I've said before, I am fine. We are fine with giving the other side and those that follow Charlie Kirk safe space in order to mourn what they saw as a fallen hero. But we're not here to lionize and canonize somebody like Charlie Kirk. Flip side is we know what happened. We know the attacks on Democrats after that, led by Donald Trump. And for him, so soon after that, so soon after Melissa Hortman in Minnesota and her husband being killed in their bed, Minneapolis lawmakers, Democratic side, and all the other things, to have him come out and do that, we already have it. We already have one of the people that participated in the video said there's been a bomb threat phoned into her house, that the sergeant at arms of the House and the Senate have to increase security for these people because of the calls of Donald Trump. Donald Trump knows that there is a cracked, violent group within his political world that will follow him. And yet he does. So you have conduct like that. You have conduct like how he has violated basic international law when it comes to blowing 20 boats out of the water without due process on some sort of reporting that he got from a cracked, half-baked intelligence community now led by Tulsi Gabbard of all things and Kash Patel, in violation of international law and military law, as you pointed out, by a memo that was all overridden by Pam Bondi, who has no background in this whatsoever, to allow them to stand up with Pete Hegseth and the rest and act tough. Human beings died in bombings I don't know if they're drug dealers. I don't know if they're narco terrorists, because they were blown out of the water before we can determine it. If you could bomb them, you can capture them, extradite them, and put them through due process. That's the American way. So you have all of these data points about Donald Trump, including the orders given to the Department of Justice personnel to effectively lie to federal judges, right? We have a case we're going to just touch on briefly that's going to be up next week. I'm going to have the head of the ACLU with me on Monday for an interview where Judge Boasberg has said, okay, and the appellate courts have supported him. I'm ready to restart the contempt proceedings against the Trump administration. And I want to hear from Erez Ruveni, who was fired by the Department of Justice early on in this administration for effectively telling the truth to a federal judge, that Emile Bove, who's now on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, told him and others in a room that they should lie to federal judges when asked about Donald Trump's removal program, and to give as much cover as possible to the Department of Justice, Homeland Security, and ICE to get these people away from federal jurisdiction and oversight as quickly as possible. This is no longer, for me, a question of if the 25th Amendment should be invoked. I believe it's when the 25th Amendment will be invoked. The problem is you need such a supermajority of the cabinet and the participation of the vice president, J.D. Vance, in order to make it happen before it goes over to Congress and then all of that. I want to hear from you, Ben, on it. I just don't see those that are surrounding Donald Trump, who he goes out of his way to make sure that they are financially benefited by his administration, and that see a future taking over the mantle from Donald Trump, like J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio and Howard Lutnick, front page of the New York Times, about Howard Lutnick's family office making billions of dollars in AI and cryptocurrency and the appearance of impropriety in that. I just don't see the 2/3 or whatever the total number is for the 25th Amendment of his cabinet and the vice president to take him out of office. What do you think?
Look, we're not there yet. Unfortunately, to get there, things are going to be getting worse in this country. And unfortunately, that's what next year looks like, based on the chickens coming home to roost, if people could even afford a chicken or a roost next year. And I say that with sardonic and a little bit of gallows humor right there, because I think that what could happen, let's just say, is that the peaceful protests that we saw with no kings becomes 3 times or 4 times the size. And what we see in America is what we've seen in peaceful protest in Eastern European areas and European areas, other places that have a history of authoritarians. And I think at some point the power from the people is going to be so overwhelming that it's going to force something to happen. And I think what we've seen through this year is that where people exert their moral, formal, ethical, whatever authority they have, and they don't back down to these bloviating bullies in the Trump regime, they're weak individuals who do back down, but they rule based on fear and terror and threats. And you have to stand up to them. When we come back, I want to talk more about what the DOJ is doing or not doing in these cases. We'll talk about the cover-up of the Epstein Files. We'll talk about Trump rigging the midterms. And I want to make one point on what Howard Lutnick's company is doing also, that I think our viewers need to know about, that I think is beyond outrageous, and it relates to the tariffs. But we'll take our first quick break of the show. A reminder, Michael Popok has started a law firm where he's representing individuals who have been injured in accidents. And we represent, through Michael Popok's law firm, Popok represents a lot of legal AFers, a lot of listeners, a lot of viewers of this. So if you or anyone you know have been injured in a car accident, a trucking accident, if you know somebody who's been injured, maybe someone who even died in an accident, give a call to Popok's law firm. It's 877-POPOK-AF, or go to the popokfirm.com. Also, subscribe to Michael Popok's YouTube channel, the Legal AF YouTube channel, and subscribe to Popok's Substack, the Legal AF Substack. Let's take our first quick break of the show. We'll be right back with a lot more on Legal AF.
Ever wake up sweaty, freezing, or just plain uncomfortable? The temperature in your bedroom can make or break your sleep. That's why I switched to Miracle Made sheets. They're inspired by NASA technology and use silver-infused temperature-regulating fabric to help you sleep perfectly all night long. With Miracle Made, you'll sleep at the perfect temperature. Whether you run hot or cold, these sheets keep you in the comfort zone from the moment you crawl in to the moment you wake up. And here's what I love. They stay cleaner longer. Thanks to their antibacterial silver technology, Miracle Made sheets stay fresh up to 3 times longer than regular sheets, meaning fewer odors, fewer wash cycles, and way less laundry. They're luxuriously comfortable too, smooth, breathable, and soft like what you'd find in a 5-star hotel, but without the luxury price tag. So upgrade your sleep or give the gift of better rest. Go to trymiracle.com/legalaf to try Miracle Made sheets today. You'll save over 40%. And when you use promo code LegalAF, you'll get an extra 20% off plus a free 3-piece towel set. They make an amazing gift. And with a 30-day money-back guarantee, there's no risk. That's trymiracle.com/legalaf. Code LegalAF at checkout. Thanks to Miracle Made for sponsoring this episode. I've been switching up my morning routine lately, and honestly, I'm kind of obsessed with this. Mud Water sent me their starter kit, and I've been making it iced like my usual cold brew, mixing it with a little milk. And yes, I've been using that free frother non-stop. What surprised me most is how calm and focused I feel. No jitters, no crash, just steady energy that actually lasts. And at night, I'm not wide awake, rethinking every decision I've made since 2012. Huge win. As the days get shorter and the nights longer and the holiday rush starts up, this has basically become my self-care ritual in a mug. Mud Water is a soothing yet energizing coffee alternative made from chai, cacao, and adaptogens like lion's mane, reishi, and chaga. It's packed with antioxidants, USDA certified organic ingredients, and zero sugar, and it gives you a natural lift without the chaos of coffee. It even makes an amazing stocking stuffer. Trust me, using Mud Water is as easy as cozying up on a crisp fall afternoon. Head to mudwater.com and grab your starter kit. For a limited time, our listeners get up to 43% off your entire order, free shipping, and a free rechargeable frother at mudwtr.com/legalaf. That's up to 43% off your order at mudwtr.com/legalaf. After you purchase, they ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. This fall, nourish your body and mind with Mud Water, a perfect addition to your self-care routine as the weather cools and the days get shorter.
Welcome back to Legal AF. Thank you to our sponsors. The discount codes are in the description below. Support our sponsors. They support our show, and they're really good sponsors, really good stuff that we support as well and that we use. And thanks to Jordy for negotiating those great discounts for the Legal AF listeners and viewers. So just the one thing I wanted to mention about Howard Lutnick. He's the Commerce Secretary, billionaire, runs a company called Cantor Fitzgerald. There are a lot of subsidiaries there. Cantor's now run by his 20-year-old kids who are basically running the company. One of the business lines that they're doing right now to make money, though, is they're going to companies that are cash strapped that may be entitled to refunds in the form of the tariffs that they've paid on the imports, because American companies pay the taxes. It's because tariffs are taxes. If the Supreme Court overrules Trump's trade war against the world, these companies in America that have paid the tariffs to the government, paid the taxes, are entitled to a refund, 100% of the refund. But they've been screwed by the tariffs, so they're losing a lot of money, and many are close to bankruptcy, so they need cash right now. So that's where Lutnick's company comes in and goes to them and says, hey, I hear you're a bit cash strapped by our policies. We think the Supreme Court may overturn our policies. So I know you need the money now because it could be a little tricky filling out these applications, to the Commerce Department that Howard Lutnick runs. And he goes, hey, what if we bought those refund rights that you may have in the future? For right now, we'll pay you right now. So even if the Supreme Court doesn't rule against the administration, no matter what, you'll get the money right now. That's the risk that Lutnick's company is going to take. But we're going to buy it for 40 cents on the dollar or 50 cents on the dollar. So if you were entitled to a $10 million rebate or refund, we'll pay you $4 million right now, and then we'll be responsible for collecting it in the future. And who knows what the Supreme Court's going to do.
So two quick observations to be perfectly candid with our audience. People know I worked at Cantor Fitzgerald 5 years ago. I was the global head of litigation. I worked under Howard at one point before he went off the deep end and became a Trump MAGA person. The sons who run the company have denied it to Elizabeth Warren that they're still doing that. But I agree with you that I have not seen evidence that they have killed that part of their business. And above the fold front page New York Times yesterday about the kleptocracy being continued between Donald Trump and people like Howard Lutnick, who go out in glad hand. Remember when they used to attack Joe Biden because he talked about the weather on a phone call with Burisma in Ukraine for his son? Forget all of that. Cantor Fitzgerald's up 25% over last year. They're making money hand over fist. And it's all because while they're making investments in AI and data centers, their father, the Commerce Secretary, is meeting with the very same people, sometimes the very same day, to promote the business interests of the United States, but also of his former family office. And if anybody doesn't think when he's all done here in a year or two, he's not going back to head up Cantor Fitzgerald and he's permanently have turned over the reins to his 28 and 30-year-old son, then you got another thing coming.
Yeah. So just the way it would work in theory, assuming the program remains in place, once the tariffs against the world are overturned by the Supreme Court, then Cantor would basically make the claim to the Commerce Department or the Treasury Department, we get 100% back now, and they would make the money on the delta.
They'd buy the claim now.
They'd buy the claim. So they'd make off the transaction that I said, they would make $6 million off of that. So that's the way that business line would work. All right. Let's talk though about DOJ. Let's talk about Eastern District of Virginia, Lindsey Halligan. Let's talk about Pam Bondi.
Can't stop laughing when we say Lindsey Halligan.
Last week when you and I did Legal AF, I think we set out what the worst case scenario could have been for Lindsey Halligan and the DOJ, which is that if she never presented an operative indictment, the operative indictment that was presented as the indictment never was put in front of the entire grand jury. And that seems to be exactly what took place. There's also a number of other problems of what went down in the grand jury room. Just to be clear, we're talking about the James Comey case. Let me just frame it that way. James Comey, motion to dismiss. There was a hearing on it for vindictive prosecution and some other defenses. But what came out this week as part of that hearing is what went down in the grand jury room when Halligan got the grand jury allegedly to sign off on this indictment. And what we learned is that it was something that really has never happened. As Judge Fitzgerald, who is the magistrate judge, said, this is uncharted territory if what happened actually happened. And just to situate you, the federal judge in this case is a guy named Judge Nachmanoff. The magistrate judge is not appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate, but they're appointed basically by the federal judges. It's called a magistrate judge, and they have a lot of roles, whether it's with grand juries, issuing subpoenas and handling discovery. So the magistrate judge is Judge Fitzpatrick. So Fitzpatrick put out an order earlier in the week talking about all of the things that seem to have gone wrong in the grand jury, including this uncharted territory issue of did the grand jury even see the operative indictment? But Fitzpatrick also laid out issues that the only person who testified in the grand jury, this FBI agent, was exposed to attorney-client privilege documents and should never have testified in the first place because the whole proceeding was tainted. If he saw the attorney-client privilege information, they should have had another FBI agent testify. Lindsey Halligan misinformed, lied to the jury about the Fifth Amendment and what Comey's Fifth Amendment rights were, and also lied about the burden of evidence in a criminal case, shifting the burden to Comey as opposed to the prosecutors to basically be the ones to prove at trial beyond a reasonable doubt and then probable cause at this grand jury proceeding. And these were questions that the grand jury was asking Halligan. Then there's, of course, the issue of her disqualification or not. But then there was this issue of she first gave the grand jury indictment number one. Indictment number one had 3 counts on it. Based on what's written, the grand jury rejected all 3 counts. It says fully rejected, right? And then she apparently said, but actually the grand jury was cool with 2 of the counts, not the full 3 counts. So she's like, I'm just going to go and copy and paste the 2 counts. Then we'll just get the 4-person to sign off on that. But let's be clear. The very first indictment was fully rejected. It didn't say we support the 2 counts. It said, no, fully rejected. And in any event, under Rule 6, and I'll toss it to you, Popok, doesn't matter, even if the grand jury approved the 2 counts and not the 3 counts, under Rule 6 of the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure, you can't just like put an X next to it or like copy and paste it. You then have to go and get them to accept your full indictment. So what you would do is you would say to them, hey, everybody, come back. We're going to print out another copy.
They already left.
And why? And this was the last day of the statute of limitations. That's why she didn't say, hey, just come back the next day or let's do this the right way. So all we have is one indictment that was rejected. And then the operative indictment was just signed off by the 4-person, but never presented to the grand jury. So Comey's gone back and Comey said, yeah, you have to dismiss it. They never saw it under Rule 6.
There's 4 separate motions to dismiss. One got filed late yesterday in the Comey case. All of them would lead to the dismissal of the indictment with prejudice and the closing of the criminal case against Comey for failure to properly indict within the 5-year statute of limitations. That's the impact. If you're right, and you are, that the indictment is invalid, is not a true bill of indictment on 2 of the counts, then the clock never stopped on the statute of limitations. It's not a clerical error. It's not a boo-boo. You don't get a mulligan. You don't get to go back. It doesn't stop the clock, and the statute of limitations has run because we're now having this conversation right before Thanksgiving in November. Statute of limitations ran on September the 5th of 2025. That's why the lawyers for Comey are fighting so hard, and he's led by some amazing lawyers. One of the lawyers that argued in the courtroom, I almost had to kind of excited. It's like a superhero within the legal world is Michael Dreeben. Michael Dreeben has argued over 100 successful United States Supreme Court arguments. He argued in a number of them involving Donald Trump. And when he heard the problem that Lindsey Halligan has and continues to compound it is that they refuse to have a senior prosecutor who knows what they're doing, or a senior appellate prosecutor who knows what they're doing, sit next to her in the courtroom. And she's either so nervous that she can't get the testimony out, or she's accidentally confessing and becoming a witness for the defense every time she speaks. So it's her and another novice prosecutor named Tyler Lemons, who nobody ever heard of. He played football at Widener a couple of years ago. And now he's been appointed a special prosecutor to sit next to Lindsey Halligan. Talk about the blind leading the blind. There's no Michael Dreebens, Patrick Fitzgerald sitting next to them, telling them how they should handle this case. So in the live hearing in front of Judge Nachmanoff, Lemons said, the grand jury never saw the actual indictment with only 2 of the counts. That is the operative indictment in this case. It was an amazing bombshell, jaw-dropping confession. And Lindsey Halligan sat right there and didn't say anything. Lemons wasn't in the room with the grand jury. Halligan was. So she never got up there. Nachmanoff then called Halligan up. He said, "You're counsel of record. address the court, which she was not prepared. And she had to admit that the indictment was effectively fabricated and manufactured, cut and pasted, as you said, by a grand jury coordinator on the fly. And the judge says, well, then I don't understand she has another problem, because in a related case involving Judge Curry, who is sitting over the issue and will rule before Thanksgiving about whether Lindsey Halligan was illegally appointed or not, she's the first one that pointed out, you got a gap in the grand jury proceeding transcript. And Lindsey Halligan, well, what do you mean? Where is your interaction related to the second indictment? Where is the court reporter in the room for that? Where is the hearing? Where? Well, no, that's the deliberation part, Judge. See, Judge, you've been on the bench for 30 years, but you forgot that while there's a grand jury deliberating, there can't be your court reporter. Are we good now? No. Because they whipped out, to try to save themselves, a 7-minute transcript to hand in to Judge Nachmanoff after the hearing, because she couldn't get her facts straight during the hearing. And she said, see, Judge, there is a transcript. Well, I thought you said there wasn't a transcript for what transpired between you and grand jurors. See, she told Judge Curry that all my interactions with the grand jury are recorded and there's nothing missing. No, not true. She had a hearing, apparently, as you and I reported back in the day, back in September, with Judge Vala, who's the magistrate judge presiding over that proceeding, in which she was caught. Apparently there was a recording of it and they got a transcript of it, in which Judge Vala said, I don't understand. Why do I have 2 indictments, both with your Lindsey Halligan's signature on them, both signed by the foreperson? She said, I only signed one. She says, no, I have 2. She said, well, I only prepared one. Well, who prepared the one that has 2 counts instead of 3? Well, and they submitted that to Judge Nachmanoff after the hearing to say, are we all good now? No. You lied to Judge Curry about your interactions with people in the grand jury, like the foreperson, after the deliberations were over. Even Judge Fitzpatrick, who's the magistrate judge, he called out earlier in the week. He said, I thought you went back in to get the second indictment approved by the grand jury. But apparently, based on your affidavit, your sworn statement, you never went back in. Now we see the 7 minutes, and it's obvious she didn't go back in. Everybody went home. You need 12 grand jurors to approve of the indictment. 11 went home at 6:57 at night. 1 was left, the foreperson. She grabbed the foreperson, put a document which she alleged to the foreperson was an accurate, true bill of 2 counts, because the first count had been eliminated, and had her sign it. You could see where a prosecutor should not be allowed, after the grand jury has broken for the day, to grab one of the grand jurors, tell them this is the indictment, and sign on the dotted line. That would be an invitation for prosecutorial abuse. They could write anything in there and have the grand juror sign it. That's why the 7-minute transcript actually undermines their entire case. Immediately upon that filing yesterday, right on top of it, you get a brand new 4th motion to dismiss by James Comey's lawyer that says, see, first of all, how can they argue that we don't get the grand jury transcript when they've provided you with another 7-minute spoon-fed version of the grand jury transcript? Of course the defense needs it to prove what happened in that room. Judge Fitzgerald has seen the grand jury transcript and has pointed out 2 constitutional violations alone by Lindsey Halligan. Judge Curry has seen the grand jury transcript, and she's about to probably bounce Lindsey Halligan as the appointed U.S. attorney. We need it as the defense. But even besides that, Judge, the indictment and the process, just based on the 7-minute transcript, is enough for you to find that such overreach and such prosecutorial abuse is infected within this transcript, that you should dismiss the indictment on that grounds alone, giving the judge yet a 4th reason to dismiss the indictment. And then we haven't even gotten into, although you touched on it, what happened and transpired within the grand jury itself, which is the subject of another motion to dismiss. And there's two major points. One is the violation of the Fifth and Sixth Amendments privileges of Comey, but also they focus on this new filing, the Comey lawyers, on the violation of the Fourth Amendment and his attorney-client privilege relationship, because they never, see, I didn't learn this until we really started digging in. They never issued a new search warrant or subpoena to the professor at Columbia who served as the lawyer for Comey, and they had an attorney-client relationship. They never got to do one. They just went back to the box from 5 years ago of Daniel Richmond's documents, and the judge says, you didn't properly preserve the attorney-client privilege. You would let the FBI look at attorney-client privilege documents and then have him testify in front of the grand jury. That's called tainted. That's called fruit of a poisonous tree, which infects the entire indictment process. So if all of that is right, which is the reason, again, I want to leave it on this, the reason that the government, the Comey side, is pushing so hard for the infirmities of the indictment is because if that indictment is void ab initio on the day it was rendered, because there is no true bill of indictment, then the statute of limitations has also run and the case should be dismissed with prejudice now. And why are we all sort of breathless about this, including Judge Nachmanoff? The trial starts in January the 5th. That's less than 2 months away. So we're waiting on a ruling from Judge Curry, which we'll report on Legal AF in here, which is supposed to happen before Thanksgiving, meaning in about 4 days, about whether Lindsey Halligan is properly appointed or not under 546. If she finds that she's not, then she's got to decide what to do with the indictment, which was only secured by Lindsey Halligan. If she doesn't kill off the indictment, Judge Nachmanoff will then go through the indictment and decide whether there's vindictive prosecution, which would kill the indictment as a punishment to the government for abuse of power, or if the whole of the indictment grand jury process is so infected with irregularity and constitutional violations that, again, the indictment should be dismissed. So about 5 different ways for the indictment to be dismissed between now and Thanksgiving or just after Thanksgiving. So if I'm a betting man, there's not going to be a trial in January because I don't think this indictment survives.
And notice that Popok and I have yet to even mention the merits of the case, because all of these constitutional infirmities, mistakes, errors, maliciousness, that's what's being focused on now, because Trump appointed unlawfully someone who's never been a federal prosecutor before in Lindsey Halligan, someone who was a beauty pageant contestant turned insurance lawyer. No offense to beauty pageant contestants.
Or insurance lawyers.
You could be, or insurance lawyers, but you could have a federal prosecutorial background and then climb the ranks through the DOJ. And then you get to do that. You get to go in a grand jury room, okay? That's not what happened here. If someone told me, let me center it around me so I don't offend beauty pageants and insurance lawyers. If you told me, hey, Ben, we're going to appoint you as the United States attorney and you're going to go into the grand jury tomorrow, I would say, nope. It's the equivalent of asking me to fly an airplane. I don't know how to do it, okay? So I'm not going to go and do that. You would say no to that, especially in a case like this. And especially where you know you're pursuing a baseless case. But let me just pull back a second as well, because this case shouldn't have been brought in the first place. So let's say that. But what would a competent federal prosecutor have done to not do the mistakes that Lindsey Halligan did? Well, you'd show up in a grand jury room and you would provide the appropriate instructions to the grand jury. If they asked you if James Comey had a Fifth Amendment right not to testify at trial, you would say that he absolutely has a Fifth Amendment right not to testify at trial. And you would not say that the burden shifts to him at certain points. You would just provide the correct legal instructions, and you would correct those legal infirmities right there by doing the correct instructions. And if you didn't know what the correct instructions were, you'd bring somebody else in the room with you who could answer that question.
Can I ask you a question? I have one question for you. Why didn't they, even to this moment, why have they not pulled from the ranks of MAGA DOJ prosecutors? There's got to be somebody there that fits the bill. Why have they not sent in to sit next to her and guide her some gray-haired DOJ from Washington, even Todd Blanche, who knows what he's doing, or Stan Woodward? Why is no one being sent down from the department? What does it say to you that no one in the indictment process, the hearings, no appellate lawyers sitting there with them? What is that? Why? What does that say to you?
It's clearly rhetorical of a question, and and it speaks for itself. It tells you that nobody else believes that there's a case here, and no one else is willing to risk their bar license the way Halligan was. But then, how would you deal with the FBI agent who was exposed to the attorney-client privilege information? Easy. Get another FBI agent.
Right, who's not exposed.
Not exposed to it. And you have that person be your witness. And the FBI is pretty big. And someone can review the file and testify to what they see in the file. But obviously, this one FBI agent hates Comey or has something, I don't know for a fact, but obviously this is the one guy, if you're willing to testify after seeing attorney-client information, it probably tells me a lot of information about who this person is. So the way you would deal with that is have the right FBI agent. Then you could say, well, Ben, what would you do? What if the grand jury rejects one count, but approved two counts? How would you deal with this?
Happens all the time, by the way.
Happens all the time. I wouldn't be bringing the case the day the statute of limitations is ending, because things can happen where you may need to bring them back the next day. So what you would normally do is not bring it the day the statute of limitations. But if they rejected, let's say it was a 25 count indictment and they rejected counts 2, 7, 9, 11, 13, 18, whatever, you would say, we respect that decision. We'll see you next week. We're going to come back. We're going to trim the causes of actions and complaints. We're going to present it to you. We value your time. We'll see you on January. Why even rush it, right? We'll see you January. Enjoy your Thanksgiving and holiday season. We'll see you back. Then everybody comes back. You say, ladies and gentlemen of the grand jury, we appreciate your time. We'll be briefer because we presented it last time. As you remember, we'll have the FBI agent just verify the testimony. Call the FBI agent. FBI agent, is all your testimony last time still true and correct? Correct. And we've gone through all of the things. Correct. Great. Ladies and gentlemen of the grand jury, we've now present you with a 15 count versus the 25 count or whatever.
Or even do it that night. If you knew what you were doing and you knew you were up against the statute of limitations, you'd have a printer in the courtroom. You'd fix your indictment. You wouldn't let them leave.
Of course.
20 walked out the door to go home.
Of course. I'm just saying, absolutely you would. But the thing is, you're creating a lot of unforced errors by bringing it in the afternoon as the statute of limitations about to expire. But yeah, you would have to tell, in the situation that she was in, and she was probably nervous. She's running out of time. Where do I go and print the paper? What do I do? And she wasn't thinking, and we don't even know, frankly, to be fair, if the grand jury even was okay with those other two counts, because all we know is that they rejected the 3 counts. So we don't know what they would do if she represented it. They'd be entitled to ask her new questions. And maybe those questions.
That's a very good point you just made. I think she might have been worried, having no experience to fall back on and no phone calls made. I think she might have been worried that if she went back with the full grand jury, that she might have lost, because they were shocked apparently that they lost on count 1. They didn't, which was their heart of their case, and it fell back to the 1001 charge for perjury and obstruction. She might have felt like, oh shit, if I go back and represent, I may not even get any true bill.
Yeah. She's nervous.
Yeah.
And the way people who are in the court, and Legal AF has lots of people in the court, they describe her as looking scared, and she bounces and she sweats And she looks at her voice cracks. And when the judge was asking her, did you?
She didn't even use her title. Who's here for the government? Lindsey Halligan, she said.
And then the judge literally said, sit down. Sit down. Like, enough of you, because you're not even articulating sentences. And so it goes to this fundamental point, and we'll talk about it more as this episode progresses, though. And this is the thing about Legal AF why I love this show and our programming so much in this community. I'm not trying to talk about, Democrats, Republicans. I just want to let you know the right way, if you wanted to do this, was this. And the wrong way to do this was this. And the worst way to do it was this.
I'm not even a huge Comey fan.
Me neither. But make a difference, But at the end of the day, the issue is: are you going about the procedure? Are you handling it the right way? Are you following the law? Exactly. Right. So anyway, we'll come right back. When we come back, we're going to talk about what else the DOJ is doing in terms of the cover-up of this Epstein Files. I think Popok and I both agree this Comey case is getting dismissed in one of 15 different ways that could potentially get dismissed before even addressing the issue of whether he lied to Congress, which the question from Ted Cruz was an ambiguously phrased, confusing question. And we know that the witnesses, both Daniel Richman and McCabe, are the only two people it could be. They're friends with Comey. It's like, what are they going to say at the trial? You think McCabe and Richmond are going to be?
McCabe leaked it. He said he leaked it on his own.
They did it themselves without the authorization. They admitted. McCabe's like, I did it. I'm allowed to do it. There's nothing wrong with me doing it.
Right.
And there was nothing to charge McCabe with. Anyway, We'll be right back. We'll take our last quick break of the show. Let's talk about Epstein, and let's talk about these gerrymandered maps. Reminder: make sure you subscribe. Make sure you subscribe to Michael Popok's Substack, Legal AF Substack. Subscribe to Michael Popok YouTube, Legal AF YouTube. And then also, if you or anyone you know have been injured in an auto accident, a trucking accident, if you know somebody who's been the victim, like in a wrongful death case, anybody you know who has a case. Michael Popok's representing a lot of our viewers and listeners who have been in these accidents, and he's helping them out. The consultation is free. So call 877-POPOK-AF, 877-POPOK-AF, or go to www.thepopokfirm.com, thepopokfirm.com. Consultation is free. We'll be right back after our last quick break of the show.
Shh, I got a secret. I'm obsessed with my Lola blanket. From the moment I pulled it out of the box, I could tell that this wasn't your average throw. The faux fur is unbelievably soft, like luxury level soft. And it just makes my space feel calm, inviting, and put together. Even here in Miami, I love wrapping up with it at the end of a day. Watching a show with my family, answering emails, or just relaxing. It's become part of my daily wind-down ritual. Honestly, I'm already thinking about replacing every other blanket I own with a Lola. It's no surprise Lola is the world's #1 blanket, made with ultra-soft vegan faux fur and a signature 4-way stretch. It's machine washable, no pilling, no shedding, and it stays flawless after every wash. It's the perfect gift, personal, beautiful, and something people actually use every day. Give the gift of softness this holiday season with Lola blankets. For a limited time, our listeners are getting a huge 40% off their entire order at lolablankets.com by using code LegalAF at checkout. Just head to lolablankets.com and use code LegalAF for 40% off. After you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them that we sent you.
All right, I got a secret to tell you. I'm obsessed with laundry sauce. I've been using it nonstop, and I swear, the second you pull clothes out of the dryer, the scent hits you, but in the best possible way. Himalayan cashmere is my current favorite. It's their first ever hypoallergenic fragrance, and it's soft, cozy, clean, all wrapped together like slipping into the perfect cashmere sweater by the fire. And yes, people have actually been complimenting how good my clothes smell. Their signature and essentials packages are everything. Pods, scent boosters, dryer sheets, the whole setup. The pre-measured pods take all the guesswork out. The scent lasts forever, and honestly, laundry has become kind of fun. And with their subscription, I never run out. It just shows up when I need it.
Laundry sauce isn't just about smelling amazing. These pods perform. They fight stains, revive fabrics, and make clothes feel brand new. And if you don't get better smelling, cleaner laundry, they offer a full money-back guarantee. This holiday season, turn your routine into a ritual with laundry sauce. During their Black Friday, Cyber Monday signature sale, you'll save up to 40%. Get $75 in free gifts and free shipping at laundrysauce.com/legalaf20. It's the perfect time to treat yourself or gift the world's most luxurious detergent to someone you love. And seriously, if you want to support the show, make sure you use our link, laundrysauce.com/legalaf20. During the Black Friday Cyber Monday signature sale, you'll save up to 40%. Get $75 in free gifts and free shipping at laundrysauce.com.
Welcome back to Legal AF. I'm Ben Meiselas, joined by Michael Popok. Thank you to our sponsors for making this show possible. The discount codes are in the description below. Support our sponsors. They support our show. One other thing I want to mention in both the Comey case and the Letitia James case that I should just say before we move on to the next topic, because Halligan's also prosecuting New York Attorney General Letitia James. In both of the files and in the discovery, there will be documents from the former head of the Eastern District of Virginia, the career prosecutors who created memos stating that there is no case against Comey and that there is no case against New York Attorney General.
Before they got fired.
Before they got fired.
Yeah.
Before the career prosecutors got fired. They wrote a memo to the file. Yeah. And in both of those cases, we've learned that as of now, the Department of Justice, Main Justice Pam Bondi, has ordered that those be covered up and not produced, and to assert attorney-client privilege objections. Isn't it funny that they intruded on the attorney-client privilege of Comey, but they're not producing their own internal documents in discovery asserting attorney-client and work product privileges? And also, in the New York Attorney General Letitia James case, you have the Fair Housing Administration, which made the referral because Bill Pulte, Trump's stooge, was the guy who made it. Their own investigative team, in addition to the prosecutor in the Eastern District of Virginia who got fired, doing a memo saying there's no case, where the complaint against James originated, the Fair Housing Administration, their internal staff wrote a memo saying there's no case against James. Then all of those people got fired and got pushed out as well. So
wait. One last thing, because we just did the report on it. If this right-wing conspiracy theorist, Christine Bish, is to be believed, who gave testimony to a grand jury last week in Maryland, the tables have turned, and the Department of Justice is now, according to her, because the way the questions were asked of her, now who knows, that they've now are looking at Bill Pulte, the head of Freddie Mae and Fannie Mac, and Ed Martin, who led the charge against Letitia James for crimes that they may have committed.
I don't fully buy that person's story yet, even though I did see it being reported. But the point I want to make is that the burden on the federal prosecutors to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Comey's guilty and that Letitia James is guilty. So I just want you to imagine if these cases ever went to trial and whoever was testifying on behalf of the government, who was supposed to be reading the file, imagine your Comey's lawyer or imagine your New York Attorney General Letitia James. I'd like to show you this document. Can you read it out loud? We hereby find that she did not commit any crimes. We hereby find that he did not commit any crimes. And this is what your office, the federal prosecutor, right there, sitting there, their office said that there was no crimes committed. That's what I said. So not only did they say they couldn't prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt, they said that any claim is frivolous and bogus. Yes. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the instruction is you must find beyond a reasonable doubt that they're guilty. You want to find the reasonable doubt? Their own office said there's no case. So I just want people to understand.
That's classic Brady material. That has to be turned over as exculpatory. But the reality is, just to take a step back, as we like to do that here, Donald Trump doesn't give a shit whether there's actually a conviction. He never did. All he cared about was the headline. Senator Schiff and Letitia James caught in federal probe related to mortgage fraud. James Comey caught in perjury probe. What happens after that? He's already lost interest. They've lost interest. They're putting no manpower behind this case. Obviously, they're sending out a rookie who was what I joke as the insta prosecutor with no backup and no support because he already got what he wanted. He got his pound of flesh. He casted shade on these people. So for political purposes, he can say Shifty Shift and Letitia James and da. But what really happens in a courtroom, you and I care about that. It's sad that the defendants have to be dragged through the mud related to it, but Donald Trump doesn't give a shit anymore.
Right, but I think this is different than when he files those frivolous $18 billion, $15 billion lawsuits as a plaintiff, or even when he gets sanctioned, he pays the $1 million sanctions, but he's fundraised the $20 million off of it. So for him, that's part of his strategy. Now we're dealing with criminal cases, DOJ, Pam Bondi, AG, Lindsey Halligan, federal judges who are used to a certain way that the DOJ behaves. And what we are going to see is, I think, graver consequences than what he was expecting for all of these individuals that will make what Trump's January 6th lawyers who were involved in those cases, what we're going to see here, I think, is something far more severe and swift. Now, to me, Lindsey Halligan is someone whose accountability will happen sooner, swifter. I think you'll start to see state bar referrals happen once these cases get dismissed in the next 12 months or so, is just my prediction, my opinion.
Well, the only thing, let me just comment on that. She's a Florida bar member, as am I. They've taken the position, as they did with Bondi, that until she's no longer in federal office, they are not going to investigate her underlying license. Now, if she gets bounced, then she's fair game for the bar. And after she leaves office.
Yeah. Now, and Pam Bondi as the attorney general, there's a different set of circumstances there. But when Pam Bondi tried to defend Lindsey Halligan in the disqualification motion aspect of this case, the way Pam Bondi did it is by saying, I've reviewed the grand jury. You should treat it as though I was there with her because I bless all of I ratify everything that happens. And so Bondi was trying to do retroactive DOJ endorsement in the event Halligan gets bounced and disqualified. Bondi's like, I'm basically the person who did it. And now, because of the separate proceedings, it's like, oh, you're the one who did it? Great. So you are now endorsing the constitutional violations. You're endorsing the fake grand jury indictment. You're endorsing the tainted attorney-client privilege. So you and Halligan are the same. You've ratified her conduct. That's why we say this is now imputed to Bondi, whereas before she could have kept the distance. All right. But let's stay on Bondi, and let's stay on the fact that Trump signed into law the discharge petition turned bill turned released the Epstein Files. So we're already seeing what this cover-up looks like, right, Popok? Ghislaine Maxwell is saying that she's done testifying in proceedings. She spoke to Trump's, former criminal defense lawyer turned number 2 at the DOJ, Todd Blanche. She gave that interview where we know she lied through her teeth basically the entire time because we saw the emails. Who would have thought a convicted child sex trafficker looking for a partner would lie? But we saw the emails from the Epstein estate where she knows a lot more than what she said she knows, obviously. And Blanche never cross-examined her on anything that we knew about her. But she's saying that if the House of Representatives, the Oversight Committee, wants her deposition now, she won't testify. She'll invoke the Fifth. She previously said that she wasn't going to sit for a deposition with the House because of the Supreme Court appeal that she had, but the Supreme Court rejected her appeal. So now she's saying, well, I still may argue in what's called the habeas corpus petition, which you and I called, Popok, that she was going to do that and use that as an excuse not to testify. I still have my constitutional rights to invoke my Fifth Amendment against self-incrimination because there's new evidence. The new evidence she's going to argue is Trump said it was a hoax. So if it's a hoax, shouldn't that have come in at trial? That's how she's kind of got Donald Trump, kind of cornered, because Trump said it was a hoax. So she'll argue to the federal judges, look, if the president of the United States says it was a hoax, that should have come in at trial. That's what she'll argue, at least, I believe. But she says she's not testifying. Now, James Comer, MAGA Republican in the House Oversight Committee, he says that why would we even go to Texas if she's just going to invoke the Fifth? Why even show up in the first place? Let's take her at her word that she's going to invoke the Fifth. We don't need to get her on camera invoking the Fifth while questions are asked her. Hey, what's your relationship with Trump? Did you see Trump ever with underage girls?
But it's an improper invocation of the Fifth Amendment. Let's just talk about the Fifth Amendment for a minute. You can only invoke the Fifth Amendment if you're in a courtroom, if you have a reasonable belief that what you're saying will incriminate you in a future or current criminal investigation or prosecution. Let's unpack that for a minute. She has Queen for the Day immunity, so she's either admitting that she lied and blew her immunity that was given to her by Donald Trump when Todd Blanche did that disgusting softball 7-hour interview where she lied through her teeth, and Todd Blanche wanted her to lie through her teeth, so he didn't challenge anything that she said, including the lies about Donald Trump. But she got immunity. She's either worried that she blew her immunity, although the Department of Justice has not said that they're going to that they believe that there's no comment at all, even after the emails came out, that she blew her immunity. But she's already serving time for the underlying child sex trafficking 5-count conviction. She's in year 2 of a 20-year sentence. So what is the crime that she's worried about where she has to invoke the Fifth Amendment? If MAGA wasn't running the House,
the new crimes that she committed with the Trump regime, she's going to use her lying with Blanche as the grounds for new crimes being charged, because she just committed new crimes in Tallahassee.
1,000%, and blew her immunity. Now, if the House was controlled like it will be in midterms by Democrats like Jamie Raskin, I would file a case to a judge to declare her invocation of the Fifth Amendment is improper. You just don't. I mean, we all know it from television and movies. Oh, the Fifth Amendment. We all think we know it, but there has to be a legitimate fear of prosecution, and I would have that sorted out in a federal courtroom about her improper invoke. It happens all the time in federal court. The way when you and I handle it. A federal judge will say, let's have a hearing about the exercise of the Fifth Amendment. What is your legitimate fear? If a statute of limitations is already run on something, the judge is not going to let you. It's just going to strip you of your Fifth Amendment right. If the judge doesn't find that you could be legitimately prosecuted for something, or the judge will often turn to the prosecution and say, give her immunity. If you give her immunity, then she'll be able to testify. So if you either give her immunity and she testifies, or you don't give her immunity, and I'm probably going to let her keep her Fifth Amendment privilege. But all that would get hashed out in a courtroom. Problem is, the MAGA is not going to go through this exercise. And so they're just going to say, like you said, oh, she took it to Fifth. Why bother going to the Beverly Hills hotel version of the prison in Texas? And we'll just let her take the Fifth. But this is, again, we're trying to point out, whether you're Republican or Democratic here on Legal AF, that we're talking about due process, constitutional rights, and things that are right and wrong. We would not be having the same discussion if the House was controlled by adults that had D next to their name.
So let's also, by the way, I would want to have the video of Ghislaine sitting there and saying, isn't it true that you spoke with Donald Trump's DOJ a few months back and you lied to him the entire time? I invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Okay. Isn't it true that what you were afraid to share? Isn't it true what you were afraid to share is that you observed Donald Trump with underage girls? I invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. You're not going to answer that question right now. You were willing to speak with Blanche as I'm asking you if you observed Donald Trump do inappropriate things with underage girls. You're not going to answer. Based on the advice of my attorney, I'm going to invoke my Fifth Amendment. Okay. So you see how that would go, and then let the public see that. That's what MAGA Republicans are terrified to see.
In a courtroom, just to round this out for our teachable moment, in a courtroom, in a civil case, not criminal. You're allowed to take the Fifth Amendment privilege in a civil case, but it is held against you. The judge will give an instruction at the request of the other party to the jury that says, we are in a civil matter here. This is not a criminal matter testifying before the House. We're in a civil matter in a courtroom. Them taking the Fifth Amendment, you can make the adverse inference that their answer would be unhelpful. In other words, did you see Donald Trump have sex with girls? Fifth Amendment privilege. You can assume that the answer to that would have been not favorable for Donald Trump. That is an actual instruction that goes to a jury when it's invoked in a non-criminal proceeding. That's the little side gig about the Fifth Amendment outside of a criminal context, when the person, yes, can't be compelled to testify against themselves if there's a legitimate fear of prosecution. But in all other matters, it's an adverse inference against them.
Exactly. Just other things to mention. We expect that the DOJ will invoke national security, that they'll invoke in current investigations, and they'll invoke any other, it's going to re-victimize the victims, which we know the victims have said release the files. And then their other argument is that it's a privacy violation and it creates new victims, that the wealthy men who are in these communications with Epstein or at the house or there or at his place, that they would now become the victims, that the men involved with Epstein are the new victims. And that's an exact terminology used by MAGA Mike Johnson, and it's sick and disgusting, but that's what it is.
It's not sick and disgusting. Did you hear what Megyn Kelly said? That unless it's an 8-year-old, if it's a barely legal, these are girls who were raped. Let's not stop beating around the bush. Some of them as young as 14. And she actually ran on a show the theory that maybe it wasn't pedophilia because of their age, 14, because they're not 8-year-olds. And even though one testified definitively that she was sexually assaulted by Donald Trump, there's no one that ties Donald Trump to rape. I'm like, this is where MAGA is right now.
Yeah. So we expect that to happen. Also, that the DOJ, I think maybe they'll wait until 30 days. They'll drop 10,000 documents that aren't relevant. Then people be like, what's this? Don't worry, we've got more coming. And then they'll drop more and more and more. And I suspect what they'll try to do is within the batches of documents they drop, they'll find people so that they can give people some red meat. Like they'll focus on Larry Summers and they'll focus and so like, look, we found it. And by the way, great. I could care less.
You should go to jail if he did something like that.
I could care less. But we want all of it out there. And so I expect that that's what they're going to do. We'll keep you posted though every step of the way on that, and we'll make sure that our coverage, holds them accountable. As we always have. Finally, Popok, before we go though, just talk about Trump rigging the midterms. There was, of course, the ruling earlier, although every week I feel like I'm aging dog years, or I'm time traveling back and forth in this Trump regime. So sometimes I conflate what's even happening in a given week. But recently, a 3-judge panel in Texas, led by a Trump-appointed judge, said that the maps in Texas that were gerrymandered were racist gerrymandered maps. And this Trump-appointed judge, in this very long opinion, cited as the evidence what would be a smoking gun of smoking guns. The DOJ wrote a letter to Texas saying, we do not want you to do partisan gerrymandering, which, by the way, we all hate partisan gerrymandering, but would be allowed under the current doctrine, unless there was a constitutional amendment against partisan gerrymandering in a state. But in Texas, their legislatures did not want to do partisan gerrymandering. So they needed some other hook. So the DOJ letter said, you've got too many Hispanics here. You've got too many black people here. You got to change the dynamics of blacks and Hispanics. You got to do race. We need to see some racial gerrymandering because and part of it also, they say like you're being racist to this group or that group or whatever. And so the judge just said, your letter saying to do racial gerrymandering. You can't do the gerrymandering that is racist in nature, that has a dilutive impact on black districts and then shifts Hispanic districts certain way. Like that's not you can't do that. So it's a racist district. In any event, the judge cites that, and then it's a big deal. Texas lost Trump-appointed judge. They're trying to the liberal Trump-appointed judge. And then what does Trump do? Emergency appeal, United States Supreme Court, Justice Alito. It's like a text message service, right? Popok, Donald Trump has with his Supreme Court. I need your help. Need your help, right-wing Supreme Court. Help me. What do you need me to do? Can you just keep the maps in Texas the way they were when they were racist? We had a scheme for the midterms, and this Trump-appointed judge screwed it up. Alito coming right up. He types out the order in 5 minutes, and shadow docket. And shadow docket restores the racist map. Now, we talked about the Purcell principle also, Popok. The Purcell principle was always, though, don't you not make these don't you keep the original maps in place? Like, to me, right before an election, in this case, wouldn't it be the 2021 maps and not these, not the racist maps in place? Or the federal court ruled already, reject this map. Why would the Supreme Court interfere with a federal judge this early? Shouldn't the Supreme Court just say, look, the federal judge ruled, that's going to be the ruling. Come back to the Supreme Court later, because the Purcell principles, we, the Supreme Court, are not getting involved in these disputes right now. So what do you make of it?
Well, and we covered it on Unprecedented, a show I do with Dina Tal that's up right now. There's a December 8th deadline for candidates in Texas to kind of sort themselves out as to who's running where. And so there is sort of an internal deadline that's running very, very quickly. I mean, December 8th is going to be right upon us soon. And so the argument there is the judges order the 3-judge panel 2-1 with a very noisy dissent by the one where he attacked the Trump-appointed judge and another judge there. It was like this whole judicial brawl broke out among MAGA, and coming out of the Fifth and coming out of the Fifth Circuit and coming out of a Trump judge was quite extraordinary. But just as I expected, they were going to run right away to Alito, who, as you said, is the Supreme Court justice that sits over the Fifth Circuit. The ruling is by the lower panel that they should go back to the 2021 map pre the elimination of the 5 seats, which, as we all know, was also the event that led Gavin Newsom to Prop 50. That and other states, well, not just that. It's not as tied to Texas as people thought it was. Like, well, what happens now if the Texas maps go away? Do Prop 50 go away? No. I've worked on enough ballot initiatives and challenges to ballot initiatives to know that that's not baked into the ballot initiatives or the proposition that was proposed to the voters about it, and they voted to have the maps redone now. So the 2021 maps, of course, had 5 more Democratic seats than the others. And for me, I agree with you. That should have been the status quo, not the new maps that just popped up. But because, talking about that Purcell doctrine, getting close to the election, December 8th is a date for them to declare and to start the campaigning. And so I knew there's another shadow hanging over this, is that we are waiting, and I'm not optimistic for a ruling to come out from the Supreme Court in a case called Calais, which arises out of a Louisiana map and MAGA Mike Johnson. And based on the oral argument a month or so ago, I don't think it looks good. I think we're going to have a Supreme Court MAGA majority that's going to rule that it's okay as long as what you're doing. I know you have the racial letter there that is big evidence, but they're going to say, as long as it's blue and red and not black and brown, you want to have more Republicans and you're in charge, you can effectively eliminate all of the black and brown people under the guise of political gerrymandering. This sticky little fact that you just outlined that was latched onto by the majority of, what about this letter that says you should do it racially? I think even the Supreme Court, MAGA 6, would find that violates Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. But we're still waiting for Calais. They're not going to, so none of the states have guidance. So I knew that Alito was going to hit pause, setting up a briefing schedule as they continue to work on the ruling in Calais, which we thought would come in the first quarter of 2026, which would still be plenty of time for maps to be redone in advance of the midterms. They're not going to issue Calais, this ruling on the Voting Rights Act, to allow for new maps effectively. They're not going to do it like at the end of the term in June for the November election. They're going to do it in the first quarter, probably early first quarter, beginning of second quarter of 2026, to give MAGA plenty of time to try to grab 10 or 12 more seats by remapping the red states. Although, and you and I reported on this, there seems to be a lot of resistance in the MAGA state houses about doing the remapping so soon. They all remapped off the last census in 2020. The only reason they're doing it now is for transparent partisan purposes to back MAGA. But Trump's, as we said at the top of this podcast, sometimes I forget where we are. The Donald Trump's grip on power is slipping in such extraordinary fashion. The lame duckness of Donald Trump on full display, that he's losing his ability to get state houses to follow his lead, just as we saw with the Epstein vote. I mean, he eventually had to blow the dog whistle to get all of MAGA to support the Epstein bill, because he had lost in the court of public opinion and had lost even Mike Johnson. And so he had to get on the bandwagon and say, sure, let them all out. Pam, don't let them all out. With the active investigation you started a week before the bill was signed. So his grip on power also has an impact and a domino effect in the state houses. So I'm not sure, even if Calais goes south for voting rights, which it will, that automatically means that he's got control of grabbing 10 or 12 or 15 more seats by having them redistrict. I'm not sure about that.
We'll keep everybody posted there every step of the way. And what's notable is that, the Supreme Court gutted a concept called pre-clearance, which used to require approval in the first instance of a 3-judge panel in the DOJ of the maps in order to determine if these maps were racist or not racist. Now, with the elimination of pre-clearance, and we've been covering that for many years, how they were gutting the Voting Rights Act by removing some of the teeth that it had. It's allowed these states to, on their own, come up with the racist maps. Then you have to challenge it, versus the states having to justify it in order for it allowed to take place in the first place. And so this was also a project of right-wing extremist Heritage Foundation, Project 2025, dating back before it was called Project 2025. And it was just kind of the Federalist Society concocting these ideas. They thought that this was a way to control the country from a perspective of basically non-majority views of things, knowing that these Republican right-wing ideas are actually not popular with a majority of people, but they wanted to impose their will on people. And it's why Prop 50 to me was so important as well, because for such a long time, Democrats would just allow the Republicans to do these things. And Democrats would be like, well, we can't do that. That's not appropriate. And we did it. It's like they're doing it and they're destroying the country, and they're controlling all of these levers because they're not playing by the rules. And we got to fight back and then restore law and order. And that's what I think is happening now. At least a recognition, rather, that needs to happen now, which is important. We saw Newsom do it in California. I want to see Virginia do what it needs to do, and I'd like to see Illinois do what it needs to do in Maryland. It's not time. It's not time to not do anything other than save this freaking democracy while we still have some semblance of it right now. So we'll do our small part every week here on Legal AF. We're grateful for you, the Legal AFers. We're grateful for everybody who watches this. The best way you can help is to share this show with as many people as you can, especially before Thanksgiving or during Thanksgiving. Let people know about Legal AF. Tell them at the Thanksgiving table, this is where you get your legal news from, because the more people who are turned on to this show, the more ways that we can just get accurate information. And that's so critical right now. Also, a reminder, Michael Popok's law firm is called the Popok Firm. And if you or anyone you know has been injured in a car accident, auto accident, if you know someone who's the victim in a wrongful death case, you want a free consultation, just give a call to Popok's law firm. It's thepopokfirm.com, 877-POPOK-AF, 877-POPOK-AF, or go to thepopokfirm.com. Also check out his Substack. Substack is on Legal AF, and the YouTube channel is Legal AF. Covered a lot on today's show. We always love covering a lot on these shows, and it's always great spending time with you all. On behalf of myself and Michael Popok, thank you, Legal AFers. We'll see you next time on Legal AF. Shout out Legal AFers. Shout out Midas Mighty.